Oh, that was me. Yata e abene. Good morning, everyone. My name is Brandon Gibson. I'm a botanist for Tribal Alliance for Pollinators and the Euchee Butterfly Farm. And we're based over in Tulsa, Oklahoma. But just to give a brief introduction about who I am, I graduated college in 2016, did ornithological work till about 2020. And in that time, that's where I sort of fell in love with a lot of our native plants, not only here in Oklahoma, but at the time I was doing primarily work with Henslow sparrows and greater prairie chickens in Nebraska and Minnesota. And when I was out there doing a lot of nesting surveys, seeing which ones were the most successful over nesting seasons, I noticed that the ones that did really well were the ones that were in fields with common grasses that I kept seeing over and over and over. I didn't know the species name or what they were, but I recognized a pattern, like, oh, there's an ashy plant that I always see that hangs low where they're always nesting. Lead plant that I know it as, Amorpha. And then all of the nesting cycles where they would have the highest production, they were nesting with big blue stem, a big blue stem, little blue stem, some switch grasses, and things like that. And so I sort of started to realize how important that these native grasses were and these plants were in terms of just providing winter food and things like that, and cover from predators. And there's a lot of hawks out in Nebraska and Minnesota, and it's very easy to see you when there's no trees. And so those bunch grasses are really what give our native birds, our ground nesting birds in particular, a lot of that protection. And so I'll kind of briefly explain about Euchee Butterfly Farm, but I'll probably predominantly talk about TAP today because we're all about plants here today. And so Euchee Butterfly Farm, so we propagate, we're mainly an education, conservation, and really just outreach organization. We're a private nonprofit as well, and so we're based again at the same location in Bixby, Oklahoma as TAP is. And so we rear out a lot of different species, and so it varies every year. And so maybe monarchs one year really heavily. This year we did a lot of Luna moss, pipevine swallowtails. Painted ladies are always sort of a common cycle of a lot of different butterfly houses. And so what I do for a lot of the caterpillars at the farm is I grow a lot of their food. And so if you want to have a certain species of butterfly or moth around your property, first thing you're going to want to look up is what kind of host plant, what kind of food are they going to eat? Regardless of whether or not sometimes that butterfly may not be pollinating those host plants, the caterpillars are what's eating all the foliage, and that's critical for them to get through their life cycle. So, we have a lot of youth groups come to the farm, Girl Scout groups, a lot of the tribal college environmental groups, and just sort of tribal communities interested in propagating not only butterflies, but as well as their native host plants. And so Tribal Alliance for Pollinators is the botany-focused side of the farm, and so that's where I do most of my work as the main botanist there. And so we work with all the tribes of Oklahoma, obviously growing out native plants. And what's really nice about what we get to do is that I get to collect all of our native seeds. So we've amassed a very, very large seed bank, which you'll see in a bit. But if someone comes to me, a tribal member, and they're asking for X species, and we don't have it in our seed bank, I'm not allowed to just order it online. I have to do research and go to federal properties and work with a lot of the state and federal agencies and to try to find this one species out in a couple different populations, collect those seeds, grow those out, and then teach those tribal members how to carefully care for it and then collect seeds off of it and propagate those gardens out more and more and more. Because a lot of the times we're talking about plants for the tribes that are culturally significant. They know the pollinator, the positives, all of that, but they're also really interested in the cultural medicinal aspects, which is a really fascinating part where I get to branch the sort of traditional ecological science along with more cultural science, which is an interesting way to get a lot of the youth interested in native plants as well. And some people ask me, well, why do you guys only work with the tribes and not just the public? How come I, as a public individual, can't just come to your greenhouse and buy your cardinal flower for $30? Well, all of the plants and the seeds that I collect have all been paid for through federal grants and state grants. And so all of those have been paid for by different people for those tribal citizens. And so what that means is that I get to charge tribal individuals, tribal citizens of Oklahoma, the tribes themselves, completely $0 for any of the plants that I produce. And they're collected locally from here, Oklahoma. I collect a lot of federal land, so refuge areas. I'm just collecting out in last week when it was 100 degrees, but it was totally worth it because I got a large amount of species diversity that I'm going to donate back to the local tribes. I'm working with the Kiowa tribe most recently around that area. And even individual citizens, I get emails all the time like, hey, do you have some swamp milkweed? I saw somebody talking about it, and I said, yes, I do have swamp milkweed. I have a ton of them. Please come get some. And so I have a good privilege of allowing, really whoever is really interested in native plants to come to our location, pick up these things, and not spend $1. And I'll tell them all about what their host plant for, the root systems. I'll teach you about the taxonomy if you're really interested in it, and so forth. And with this work, we recently got featured in National Geographic. This is the January 2024 issue, and so this was just a few months ago. And we got highlighted for doing some work with the Creek Nation in this article specifically. And there I am on the top right. We're planting some buttonbush, Cephalanthus occidentalis. We planted some swamp sunflower, Helianthus angustifolius, some frostweed, Verbicina virginica, and so on and so forth. And we had a very, very good survival rate around that pond edge where they were taking those photos. You can go back to that pond. Nowadays, this is about 2 years ago when the actual photographers were here. It takes a long time to go through thousands and thousands and thousands of photos if you're a National Geographic photographer, because they spend about a week with us just documenting what our process is like. And so going back to what's really cool about working at this position is that I get to go to the tribes and directly ask them what they're looking for. I grow the stuff that I think is really good ecologically, but it's a really important thing for me to ask the tribes themselves, what are you all looking for? I want your input. I have the know-how to grow this stuff and where to find it, but if I don't know the cultural reason, they share that with me, which I feel very, very special because they don't have any reason to, the Chickasaws don't have any reason to share cultural information about their plants. With me being Navajo, Cherokee, and Choctaw, I'm not part of their tribe, but they feel safe enough with us that I, hold it very dear that we don't share the cultural information with just the public. That's up to them to distribute how they want. But they do have a lot of great public posters, such as this one from Cherokee Nation, where I saw this one a couple years ago when one of the citizens brought it to me, and they started pointing out, can you find me this plant, this plant, this plant, and this one? I don't know the names of them at all. I only know the traditional names, but they had a photo with it, and that was a very good indicator for me. If I got a photo and a general location, a county, I can usually be pretty good at figuring out what species you're looking for, or at least show you 2 pictures and say, this one or this one, like we're trying to catch a perp, And so with that, that's where I come in for a lot of the tribes around here in Oklahoma. And then also, again, going back to education, working a lot with the youth. These are the next farmers, the next generation. I'm not going to be around for very long, so I want to have this knowledge keep going on and on. The same way a lot of our cultural stories, our songs, and our just instilled respect for the land as tribal members goes forward and forward throughout the centuries. And so again, we do a lot with not only individual citizens, but for the tribes themselves. And the bottom right there, that was a planting from about 1.5 years ago with the Choctaw Nation. And we planted some frog fruit, some hibiscus, some cone flowers, and a couple other vines and things like that they were looking for. And they were nice enough to produce nice signs with it, just as a show of respect to say, look, we're taking care of this stuff. We're not going to just neglect it. We're going to highlight it because they are, a core part of why we are here. We wouldn't be here without our native pollinators and our native host plants. Thousands of years ago, bugs were very, very crucial. They still are, but they are even more of a crucial part of what all of our wildlife are able to accomplish. And so this is also another recent planting at the College of Muskogee Nation. That was probably about 2.5 months ago, and this is what it looks like today. And so we have a lot of different color. The last presenter mentioned we want to have lots of different colors throughout the season. So that's what I always think about too. So I'm trying to mix in what the tribes as a whole, an individual, and then also what I think best and what I would recommend from an ecological standpoint, being a biologist for many years. So in this photo, these are a lot of our core staples that we grow every single season. The cardinal flower, which we'll talk a bit about later on, with that bright red coloration. I got some swamp milkweed for the monarchs coming through. Verbena hastata, the blue vervain, some cup plants. And again, this was all planted and grown from seed just about 2.5 months ago. And so next year, this thing is going to be even more fuller. We're going to collect those seeds off of, especially that cardinal flower there, spread them around their local ponds that they have on campus as well, and teach those students how to exactly do this, because it's a little more complicated than just take seed, pit in ground, water. There's a little more complex stuff than that. And why we grow this stuff, like I've mentioned, is host plants. We all love bugs, we all love butterflies. And it's important to think about that we're not outside of the food web. You know, we like to think we're high and mighty and like, oh, we're humans, we're smart. Guess who's causing a lot of these problems at the same time? It's us. So we are exclusive, we are dependent on the plants and the pollinators that are around us, because that directly affects the soil microorganisms, which affects the ungulates, you know, the deer, which we eat a lot of meat of, the crops we harvest, all of the corn, the soybeans. They are getting pollinated a lot of the time by our native pollinators. And so here on the left side, we have Indian grass, Sorghastrum nutans. I'm a big fan of our native bunch grasses because they are host plants that can be easily overlooked, because they might not have big showy nectar flowers, but those flowers are still very, very important, especially that foliage. You know, the Indian grass is a host plant for a moth here in Oklahoma called the salt and pepper moth, which is, you know, easy to look by because it might look drab, but a lot of our moths are, and our moths do a lot of our pollination, especially at nighttime. And we're learning that they're a way more important factor of our overall pollination cycle than we gave them credit for. And so thinking about the food web as a whole, we also want to service the entire food web. We don't want to think about just butterflies. We don't want to think about just a monarch, which is a good sort of keystone species, but we want to think about everyone else too. And so pipevine is a good example of that. Aristolochia tomentosa. This is another core staple that I grow every single year. I have about 300 plant plugs at our farm right now that I'm trying to get rid of right now that are looking healthy. I got a nice long deep taproot established on them. And what's interesting about this plant is that what people know pipevine for is the beautiful pipevine butterfly. And so this is what you see flying around. You'll still see some flying around. I saw one yesterday looking pretty old at this point. But so the pipevine swallowtail doesn't actually really ever go and visit the actual flower of the pipevine. That's that top right photo called woolly Dutchman's pipe. It looks like a smoking pipe. And how this flower actually gets pollinated, these flowers are typically up in the tree canopy, you know, 30, 40 feet up in trees, and they go all the way to the top. Typically, when I collect these seed pods, like the photo of these seed pods in the middle, I'm 30 feet up in a tree with a rope trying to rope in stems and try to clip them so I can, you know, take a couple back and grow out a couple thousand. Now that flower, it emits sort of a carry-on-like aroma. And so it's not a sweet smell. It's imitating something that's sort of rotting. Who's that going to attract? Flies, yeah, absolutely. And so flies are the main people pollinating the flower and producing the seeds and allowing that pipevine to expand and propagate and produce more foliage for specifically those pipevine swallowtails. And so without the flies pollinating the actual flower of the pipevine, we wouldn't get more populations of the actual plant itself. And so it's an interesting thing to think about, all of the complex relationships between all of the pollinators and the foliage itself, the seeds, and then who's spreading those seeds? Little mammals on the ground and birds and things like that. And so it's all interconnected again. Another different host plant, we're talking all the way up into trees. People always ask me about cover plants. We don't have a lot of native ground covers here in Oklahoma, but one of the common ones I always recommend because of how easily it is established and how much sort of caterpillar production I see off of it, and that's called frog fruit. I guarantee a lot of these plants I'm talking about today are probably going to be sold by some of these vendors out here. I haven't visited through all of them yet, but I'm going to go take a tour as well. So frog fruit that you'll find out there, I know you will, is a really unique ground cover. It gets only about this high. My dog takes naps in it all the time. People walk through it. It might go flat for 30 minutes, but then it pops right back up. It's a host plant for the common buckeye caterpillar, which is that guy down in the bottom right. So again, we need those host plants again to get those common buckeyes. And now that I've planted frog fruit all over the property, we have an insane amount of common buckeyes comparatively to 3 years ago. Same thing with the pipevine. We have an entire building longer than this lined with trellis of nothing but pipevine, and we have had a record number of pipevine swallowtail butterflies on the property just because 3 years ago, we decided, well, let's try planting an entire row of pipevine and giving it a long trellis. And it's really cool thinking about flowers as well, how interconnected everything is. Look how tiny those flowers are. I mean, that flower is underneath a hand lens. And it's not one flower, it's a crown of multiple flowers. And who do you see using these? Flies, and then also tiny, tiny, tiny little metallic sweat bees. Those sweat bees that you see zooming so fast you can't ever get a look at them. Those bees maybe aren't able to utilize something like a hibiscus flower, a hibiscus laevis, let's say, because the flower, morphologically, the structure of it just doesn't line up with something that tiny. And so it's very important not only to plant color variety, but size variety as well, because again, we're trying to service the entire food web in one little patch of a pollinator garden. And again, thinking about what else we're helping out, bugs. We need more bugs, just spiders. And I know spiders might be kind of scary and icky, but they are a crucial part of the ecosystem. They get rid of a lot of the pests. I never get rid of any of the spiders I see in my greenhouse. I let them do their thing. Even aphids. I get some aphids in my greenhouse, but I don't worry about them because early in the season, I plant frostweed, which is a host plant for black aphids. Black aphids typically come in a few weeks earlier than the orange aphids in the summer. And so if I can get a population of those ladybugs coming and feeding on those black aphids, because they're there earlier than the orange aphids, they're just waiting for someone to eat. And so I let the black aphids go all over the frostweed because the ladybugs I see are just having a buffet on it. And then when the orange aphids come in through later in the season, I have a large population of ladybugs still just going in and out of the greenhouse, cleaning up those aphids for me, so I don't ever have to worry about them. And let's talk about birds again. I guess on the bottom left here, talking about birds with prairie chickens. This isn't a prairie chicken, but we have a patch of some switchgrass here, and then also right behind it, we're sort of at the base of where it's made its nest. This is a western meadowlark. It made its nest at the very bottom of a green antelope horn milkweed, Asclepias viridis. And so this is a really cool thing to see because viridis, as you know, typically it grows upwards and then it typically flops over, and so it provides sort of a natural shade for that nest as well. And I love birds, so I always plant a lot of red flowering plants. And so we got standing cypress, Ipomopsis ruba on the far left. The middle is cardinal flower, Lobelia cardinalis, and on the right side is Lonicera sempervirens. Coral honeysuckle, which is a fantastic thing that I grow hundreds and hundreds of them every single year because of how easy they are to grow with the way that we propagate them. And again, what are the birds eating? Going back to the main focus of trying to go back to plants. Bugs, they're eating bugs again, guys. If being a bird biologist, I've seen the inside of bird crops in and out of the field, just doing research, and you'll notice that, especially during the summertime, a bird's crop it's completely full of bugs. There might be a berry here and there, but it's a large majority going to be bugs. And during the wintertime, it switches more to those berries, those rose hips, coral berries and things like that. So it depends on the time of the year. But during the summer, their peak breeding season, they need the grasshoppers, they need those pipevine swallowtail caterpillars, monarchs, unfortunately, which we do love monarchs, but they do get predated upon. I'll skip over some of this stuff just so we can get some questions at the end and talk a little bit more about plants, but the last presenter also mentioned how important it is in seasonally. Look at how different these two gardens look, and this is less than a month. So May 26th to June 18th, and this is the same exact angle in the same exact garden. So we got all blooming penstemon here, Penstemon digitalis, foxglove beard tongue. And then less than a month later, you don't even see the foxglove anymore, the beard tongue. And when I say foxglove, it's not the European one. It's just a silly common name thing. This is a native penstemon to Oklahoma. And then, so you lose that white, but then you get all of this pink from the Monarda fistulosa, the bee balm. We have some senna that's already going to seed right now, some senna alata, Maryland senna, purple coneflower, Echinacea purpurea there. And so that same sort of idea is going to go factoring into seed collection, because you got to be out in a field quite a bit, visiting it consistently to get a full idea of what's all out there. And so this is sort of an example of some of the workshops that we have. And so in about a month from now in Tulsa at the farm, it's going to be open to all tribal members. We're going to have a full seed propagation workshop. We're going to do collection. And so I'm going to show you how to identify a plant, collect the seeds, process those seeds, put it in stratification, scarification, do we need to do the exposure to heat, and so on and so forth, and where to look up those things, how to pot it, transplant it up all in one day. And so this would be an example of a slide right before we're about to go out into the field. Just sort of characteristical data I've picked up on, and things, you always want to have as much data as possible when you're collecting seeds, because it's always really irritating when I go back and someone hands me seeds collected back in 2013, and then there's one slip of paper and it says Otoka County. And I'm like, okay, well, great, fantastic. I'll grow it out and then I'll figure it out then. But let's talk about seed collection real quick. And so talking about seed collection, timing is a really big factor. We don't ever want to collect anything that's flowering, because then it's probably not mature yet. The Baptisia seed pods there on the left, which obviously you can tell this is a bean species, white wild indigo is the common name. I'm really bad with common names, sorry, so they might be a little off. But what you want to look for is actually these dried seed pods. So things you're going to be collecting are going to look dead. They're going to be, black stalks. They're going to be no leaves. And you might not feel like you're collecting seeds until you really get down and start to look at it really closely. They might be just really, 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 really tiny seeds. And so Baptisia alba, here it is again in the process of drying out. You can see the actual moisture leaving that seed capsule there with the black dark coming in, but still with some of that fleshy green in there. And then also teach them, let's think about the bugs again while we're doing seed collection. We don't want to take everything. We want to be ethical about this, because it is an opportunity and a privilege for us to collect from the wild. So if I see bugs in there, bugs already heading up to the seed, that's completely theirs. That's not for me. Because, again, me being an ornithologist, we've raised birds in Oklahoma from Nebraska genetics. So where I found those eggs in Nebraska, and then they reared them as a chick, and then we released them in Nebraska. I view that the same exact way as me collecting seeds. So when I collect a Baptisia pod from Cherokee County, that's like me taking an egg out of a nest. I need to hold that in a very, very high regard, because plants are, by definition, true wildlife. And so you would look like a monster if you saw somebody take an American robin egg out and then they kind of just left it in the corner, and then 2 months later they're like, I don't know why it didn't hatch. And it's like, well, you didn't take care of it, and you didn't give it its proper needs that are very, very complex. And so going back to just sort of seed collection example, people ask me sometimes, how do I collect seeds off of the right side picture? And it's like, well, you wait 2 months, and then it's going to look a bit more like this. So just get in the habit of seed collection a lot of the time is you're looking for a lot of dead sticks. This is one of my favorites I always highlight here, and I wish it would be propagated more here in Oklahoma, because, we talk a lot about, you hear ag people talk a lot about cover crops and, soybeans, and that they're always non-native soybeans and they're vetches and things like that, which is, they're just doing it for soil amendment so they can throw another line of crops in there the next season, which is fine. We need our food. I understand that. I'm not anti-farming, but I do think things could be updated a bit with terms of the wildlife that we have left in mind in a good way. So this is a bean species, as you can tell by the pods again. Dark, dried out on the left. The flower is not super showy, it's tiny. And I guarantee you every single person in this room has driven past this. Even driving here today, probably 98% of us all drove past a ton of these. And they're all perfectly looking like the left side picture right now. And so what I love about this plant the most is the fact that it has a very special characteristic of the bean family called nitrogen fixation. Not every single bean species can do nitrogen fixation, so you do have to do a little bit of research. But what this one does specifically is that, nitrogen is a very important part of who we are as humans, who all of the wildlife, living organisms are. The air that we're breathing right now, 75% nitrogen. And that nitrogen in the air, the chemical equation is going to be two molecules tied together. So N2, oxygen is O2, N2. And so you got two molecules of nitrogen bound very, very, very tightly together. Our body and a lot of other organisms have no way to break this bond between these two atoms. But what happens magically in these sort of root systems of these bean plants, or of this Illinois bundleflower we're talking about, if you look at the root systems very closely, you'll see a lot of sort of hairy nodules along the stems. And so those are sort of areas where organisms get trapped in there. And then so there's interactions happening in between those nodules that is essentially the mycorrhizae are also, the mycorrhizae in the soil along with the actual plant root produce a enzyme called nitrogenase. And nitrogenase is able to break those N2 bonds apart and provide us pure N molecules. And so when a deer eats foliage or the bean pods off of this plant, that's how they're getting nitrogen in the body. Nobody's getting it directly from into air and then able to break that bond apart. So without the bean species of the world, we, as all the species and ungulates and things like that, we would not be able to survive. And so even these underappreciated, non-showy native plants provide critical, massive parts of our ecosystem and our livelihood. Not only as well as being a great soil amendment. And I'll skip through some of these milkweeds. Everyone knows Viridis. Just talking about what some of the seed pod collection looks like, what to collect, what not to collect. Again, we're talking about respect for the bugs on that right side. I would probably leave those. And I'm not an enemy of milkweed bugs. Again, they're a natural part of the cycle. They were here long before I was, and so I'm gonna let them do their thing. They've been around a lot longer than I have. They probably got it figured out better. Going back to cardinal flower real quick, looking at the flower morphology of all the native flowers is really interesting too. To see, you see one big red set of petals, and you might think that's one flower. Well, no, actually, it's comprised of a ton of flowers, and so off of that red flower there on the right, it produces one seed capsule. And look at how many seeds I get off of just 2 capsules. That's enough for you to provide, a lifetime of seeds for you to grow Lobelia cardinalis. And then count how many capsules are on the stalk of one mature stalk. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and that's just one side of it. And then it's also going to have multiple stalks on one individual. So if you do seed collection, you can really flesh out a lot of these plants quite easily if you just sort of do some research and figure out what these things are like out in the wild. And so after I collect a lot of these seeds, I take them back, I let them dry out properly in paper bags. My dog likes to help whenever he can. And then after we go and clean them all through our fancy seed cleaning machines, they go into our seed bank, which we are working on expanding because I'm running out of space already in the best way possible. I've collected too much native seed that we are running out of storage. And so we're getting a grant to have an entirely different building subset added on that's going to be humidity controlled, AC 24/7 with backup generators. So I am super, super excited to be moving out of just a standard fridge because that's what this is. Just keep it at 40 degrees. That's what everyone's fridge in here is like. So just put your seeds next to your bologna and they'll be fine. And we sort our seed bank by Bailey's ecoregions, if anyone's wondering. Some people ask. I don't bother with zones. I think they're outdated. I know they updated them very recently, but still, I think they're outdated. And so this is an example of some of the seed packets we grow. We provide the Latin name, the scientific name, the common name, about how many seeds are in there, and then just some fancy Excel data that goes back to us so we know exactly where every single seed and plant that we grow and distribute is coming from. And then this is our seed cleaning machine. This is a very fancy fan, essentially. It's cost us a $10,000 grant just to get one of these, but it paid for itself in like 2 or 3 weeks by far because of how much man hours it saves from me using sieves manually and going through and cleaning these seeds up and making sure that they're going to store properly for years and years and years to come. And so how it works is down in the bottom left here, there's a little tray here where you can put all of your seeds in. So those Baptisia seed pods we were talking about, I would just get a metal bowl, put some leather gloves on, and crush everything up as fine as possible, and then load that into the container. After you turn the machine on, a fan intake blows upward, and seeds by weight are going to be much, much, much denser than any sort of sticks or leaves in there because leaves, even when, leaves, when they dry out, they have no moisture in them. It's just, there's no moisture essentially. It's all dried out. So it's very, very light. But seeds, even when they are mature, they still have a decent amount of moisture in them. And so they probably average about 8% of what their total moisture content was at the beginning to when they're actually mature. And so that 8% makes a big weight difference. So even those tiny, tiny little cardinal flower seeds in this photo still are perfectly fine staying at the very bottom comparatively to all of the leaves and the dried stems that are, this big those are way lighter than those seeds right there. And so that's an easy way for me to clean out non-viable seeds as well. That's what makes our seed bank different than some of the tribal seed banks I see across the state, is that when a predator or a bug or something like that burrows into the center of a seed to extract some of that energy from it, that seed loses all of that weight because that density I'm talking about is in the center of that seed, and that's what the bugs are looking for. And so tribes will give out, tribes or universities even, will give out seed packets, and then I'll have individuals come to me and be like, oh, I couldn't grow anything from X seed bank, and let's say button bush that top left there. Button bush is a very easy plant to grow. You put it underneath soil, no stratification, that's all you got to do, and keep it wet. And so I had 6 people in a row in the same event tell me they couldn't grow button bush from this one seed bank that they were getting from. And I asked them can I look at the seeds? And so they had a packet at the time, and I flipped it over. The package looked pretty. It looked, nice picture of it in bloom, had the scientific name, the cultural name, and everything. But then I flipped it over, and I could see the seeds themselves, and I could tell within a few seconds that over 95% of the seeds were completely inviable because they had no way to sift out the inviable seeds because they were only using sieves, which you have to do just manually. So if they were going to get rid of all those inviable seeds, they would have to go through and individually pick all of those out. I'll skip through some of the plant propagation, but this is kind of just a preview about how we grow a lot of this stuff, and it really does save you a lot of money. I highly encourage everyone to start collecting some seeds because it'd be amazed. I did a workshop a day and a half ago on seed collection. I guarantee you those people walked away just in an hour walk around our prairie remnant. They all had paper bags. I told them what it was, how to label it, and they walked away with at least over $100 in seeds if they ordered it from online or just bought it locally. And so it's a cool way to learn about the plants, and you sort of just develop a newfound respect for them. And you can grow these things in pretty small areas. And so, we're not a large organization. We're getting another greenhouse. We have 2 large greenhouses and 1 small greenhouse that's more for agricultural reasons. I say that, but then I sneak passion flower in there just because it's fun. So it's a little bit of a mix, but we're getting another large greenhouse next season. And I turned this thing over about 3 times during the season, no problem. An example of some of our healthy looking plant plugs that I go a bit more into root systems later on. And then this is an example of like if a tribal member said, hey kid, I don't know what I'm looking for, but I have this amount of land. Can I come by the farm and can you just recommend stuff? And also I don't have a lot of time. And so I can go ahead in advance and prepare them a mix of things that I believe would be beneficial for their county and their area. And in their sunlight, I ask them a couple questions before, and so this is a good example. So I get grasses in there, I get your forbs, a larger shrub, something that produces berries, milkweed, obviously. And we could talk about cloning if you want to after, but I just want to make sure we have time for questions. And so I'll kind of skip forward to the end here. And this is just a list of a lot of the great resources I used very early on in learning about all of this stuff, because when I started this position, I'm not saying this as a brag, I didn't have any idea what I was doing. I had 3 botany courses in college, but I was not fascinated by botany at the time. I was a bird guy. I got bird brain at that moment. But, coming to TAP, Jane Breckenridge, the director, I'm very, very grateful there that she took a chance on me, because I started to learn quite a bit and try to teach myself a lot of these concepts. And so just a lot of Googling, a lot of reading books, and, just keeping on experimenting. Every single time you put a seed in the ground, you're a scientist. Think about it like a scientific experiment. And so what does every good scientific experiment have? As few variables as possible, because if something goes wrong at the end, it becomes a lot easier to figure out what went wrong if we have as few variables as possible. So consistency, cleanliness, and documentation is a big part of what I do. And then just some online resources as well outside of books. But I'll go back to that in a second. But with that being said, I'll go ahead and wrap it up there. I'll be walking all around, but does anyone have any questions for right now? Yes?
What model is that seed cleaner?
Hoffman HE blower. Hoffman is the company. Hoffman seed, I might be able to read it off the photo. Hoffman seed blower. If you Google that, it's the only thing that's going to pop up, and they have a couple different varieties of them.
Maybe some that are less than $10,000?
A little bit, yeah, and they have some that are more. Yeah, so you can go both ways. But any other questions? Yes. I'm sorry, I could. The website? Oh, our website, yes. Our website is Tribal Alliance for Pollinators, and so that's where we all post a lot of our just upcoming webinars, our workshops, and just general information. We have all of our seed bank information on there online. We try to update it once a winter. Again, we are a small team, and during the warm time of the year, I got to be out digging holes and moving dirt and pouring water on the ground on stuff. And so during the winter is usually when we update the website, but I try to put in any sort of unique information I have first and foremost on the website. So again, with these native plant species, there is no booklet on how to grow a lot of this stuff. There is no standard. Of course, there's standards for, Monardas and the common things you see, but for a lot of the cultural ones that we're losing populations of in the wild, those are the ones where there's really little information on. So a lot of the time, I'm just going to Google Scholar and trying to find any sort of scientific reference, any sort of scientific article. Even if they're not studying propagation, I can usually infer something off of the method section, what they resulted from, and so on and so forth. And so I try to put that information if I can't find that stuff anywhere online first. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Very good. Oh, my bad. We had a question back there. Very, very accurately. I can walk you within 10 feet of every single plant plug in this entire photo because I'm the guy that's out there collecting them. And so I have a GPS point. I have photos for every single thing I collect as well. That's a big part during seed collection. I take photos of every single thing I collect, even if I already know exactly what the species is, because I just need to document that. And then I write that number down on the bag. So when I'm collecting seeds, maybe, let's say I don't know what it is. All I know is like, oh, it's a goldenrod. Goldenrods are good. It looks a little weird. I don't think I've seen that one. Throw some in the bag, and then I'll take a photo of that. Oh, it's 9:46 exactly a.m. Write that on the bag, so 2 months later, when I'm cleaning those seeds, I can infer directly back to that photo. The photo has a GPS location embedded into it, and I can do that and enter that into our Excel sheet. And we try to get our plants as close as possible. I'm not going to take something from Lawton, Oklahoma, even though they have species of Salvia azarea, the same way we have species of Salvia azarea in Tulsa County. I'm not going to intermix the two because the climates are just way different. The geology is way different. The rainfall is way different. And so it's important to me to keep these sort of microclimates intact because it really does make a